Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliet Clark, and we have an old favorite back on the show today. But before we get to our oldie but goldie here, I want to remind you guys to go over and take our Promote, Profit, Publish quiz, www.promoteprofitpublishquiz.com. Remember, your book is not just about writing it. It's not just about selling it. It's about the audience you build, what you can do with that audience to build bigger, better products and actually know what they want and need and how to promote yourself. So remember to go over and take the quiz and find out if you've got it all together and you're ready. Also, if you're listening on podcast, everybody we have on here is also over on our YouTube channel. So go over and subscribe, Superbrand Publishing. You can see these are real people. I'm not just sitting here like the Simpsons doing voices. These are real interviews with real people. So we want to welcome back Tracy Hazzard today. You haven't been on for like a year, girl. It's been a while.
Been a year?
Yeah.
We talk all the time, so it's hard to remember if we were recording or not.
Yeah. So I have her husband on a while back, but for those of you who haven't listened to Tracy before, she's a seasoned media expert with over 2,600 interviews from articles in Authority Magazine, BuzzFeed, and her Inc. magazine column, and her multiple top-ranked video casts and podcasts like The Binge Factor and Feed Your Brand. One of the CIO's top 26 entrepreneur podcasts. Tracy brings diverse views from what works and what doesn't work in marketing, branding, and media from thought leaders and industry icons. And she redefines success, not sex. Oh my God. She redefines that too. We'll have a discussion about that. She's redefining what success looks like in the media world. Wow. Talk about a Freudian slip there. Whoa.
Oh my goodness.
So welcome, Tracy.
Welcome. Thank you. It's
like
so exciting to talk to you on air again.
I know. So we'll just call you like the Dr. Ruth of media.
Yeah, really. I don't think there is much that we haven't talked about on our show before.
Probably not. So you guys, as you remember from the past podcasts, Tracy owns Podetize with her husband, Tom, and they are the biggest post-production podcast company in the world. So they deal with a lot of podcast production, and they have started a new program where they actually find you interviews. And that's what I wanted to talk about today. I know we've talked about it in the past, but we want to find out how you know you're getting ROI from these and what to do and what not to do. So take it, Tracy.
So this program, the guesting program came out of the fact that I kept teaching to people, you're approaching podcasters wrong. Stop doing this. Stop sending these horrible pitch letters. Stop sending these ridiculous one sheets that work. Maybe if you were targeting regular standard media, traditional old school media, or if you're doing speaking engagements, but it's not the same thing when you're approaching podcasts, because podcasts and most podcasters follow a digital marketing model. So it's more like approaching a blogger to guest blog for you or feature your product, feature you and share you, approaching an influencer like that than it is approaching a media conglomerate, right? And so that's how this program came about, because people would, just like everything else in my business, people would be like, Tracy, just do it for me, please. And so that's how this came about. It's actually now, gosh, I think it's almost a year old actually since we've been doing it. But we haven't really been selling it until late last year. So
yeah. So in the past, I send these to you all the time. I get people that pitch me and I go look them up, never heard of them. And I send them to you because you're an influencer. And I think, well, maybe she has. And you rarely do. You've rarely heard of them either. And
right.
Here's one of the things I noticed the most. I can tell they've never listened to my show because they'll tell me how much they like my show. Oh, which is your favorite episode and why? And then I never hear from them again.
That's right. Well, here's the thing. Look, podcasters have giant egos. Let me tell you, just like all the celebrities, right, that are doing, TV shows, media, you don't get, gosh, I don't even know who's got the latest talk show on daytime nowadays because I haven't watched daytime TV in decades. But, I think Drew Barrymore has one, right? And so, someone who has a new show, right? But you're never going to get them anyway. So stroking their ego doesn't work. You're going through producers. But with podcasters, there's no producers in the mix. There's none of that sort of like, let's, deal with the facts, right? There's no one in there. There's just the ego at the other end typically. And maybe an assistant who's just busy and, just going to pass stuff through. And that's about it. But instead we get these horrible pitches that are all about me, and not about the show, which is what you're experiencing by realizing that they never even listen to it. But worse than that, it's because they're pulling lists from one single place in the podcast ecosystem. They're pulling their list from a place called Listen Notes. And here's the thing, look, you can do that yourself and not pay a publicist a ton of money to go pull a crappy list for you. And that's what they're doing. They're pulling a bad list because they're not utilizing the criteria properly. And so, and not that you can really do it that well over at Listen Notes. We have our own proprietary system that we utilize here that we do. And that's why people kept saying, Tracy, just pull me the list for me. It would be easier. But it's that list building side of things that if you don't tip it and you don't look very carefully and you don't craft it, as you always say, Juliet, to the audience you want to talk to, then you're going to get junk results.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is so true. And just to give you guys some context of that, I've had plumbing coaches. I didn't even know there was such a thing. Here, I want to be on your show. How many of you raise your hand? I hope I can't see it because you're probably not raising your hand. Want to hear that? It's not the niche of this show.
If you had an architectural show, maybe, but not if you're doing a show on promote, profit, publish, right?
Right.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Your title doesn't even make sense. They should have weeded that one out instantly, but it's because nobody's spending the time. They're like, it's cheaper and easier for them to buy a list, just like we used to buy email lists and blanket send it out and hope somebody responds. Hope, which I hate that term, hope somebody responds, than it is to go through the list ourselves and weed it out.
Exactly. And I remember a while back, our friend Jim Beach, had somebody pull one offline. And I remember going through it when he gave it to us gratis. And most of the shows weren't even in publication anymore.
Right. And that's the number one criteria, is that most often you'll find out that the first thing you should do, and you can do even in Listen Notes, is screen through someone who hasn't posted in the last week. Now, what happens is a lot of people go, because in the media, publicists and others, they hear about these seasons. So they're afraid to not miss a season of a show. But there are so few. There's such a small percentage, less than 2% of podcasts have seasons at all. And almost all of those 2% are controlled by large networks. So your chance of getting in to be hosted, to be guest on their show, is slim anyway. But so if we screen out instead and say, if someone hasn't posted in the last week, they're not being consistent and constant with their content, then they're actually not a show that I want to be on. And if we take that tact, we're going to get a better list just from the beginning.
So let's talk about that little piece for a minute, because you and I were working on a project last week, and I didn't realize until I went through the content that you had that many of the podcasts are actually produced by big media companies now. It's not, I'm rare to be a little guy.
So it's actually not. That's not 100% true. The ones that we hear about, the ones that make the top list, the ones that we see, but the reality is they represent about less than 10% of the whole podcasting ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So the indie podcasters are still 90% of the content out there. They're just not the big numbers that qualify for advertisements. So out of the whole ecosystem of what I call active podcasters, so there are 2 million podcasts out in the marketplace. There are only about 400,000 or so of them that are active, that post every single week, that are in that process, that aren't what we call pod faded or dead podcasts, old podcasts. And so that's a limited group when you think about that. Out of 2 million, that's pretty small. And out of that group of people, then there's really only 10% of them that are at this network level, able to take on high brand advertising and other things like that. So there's still a lot of play for everybody else out there to get featured.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I know my authors are really intent about is there's so many services contacting them on LinkedIn. I know I have the same thing. I usually book, or people reach out to me to book. For the most part, I don't go seeking a lot of interviews. But they'll say, this company's come at me. They'll get me, 5 interviews for $5,000. Tell us a little bit about how, if you're going to purchase something like that, what do you consider? And how do you know you're getting ROI from it? Because I want some return on my investment if I invest $5,000.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. If you're not defining that clear-cut criteria at the beginning, you're not going to hire the right company. So if your clear-cut criteria that you're setting says, I want to sell books on this show, then your chances of doing that on a show that is mismatched with you, as you were talking about before, right? If it's not a right fit from an audience perspective, then you will not sell books. It's just not going to happen. And so that's where we really have to go in and look at the audiences of each of the shows. So if they're not going to take the time to build you a list, screen through and find the perfect right fit matches for you, that they know are good quality shows, that they know have good audiences, that they have a tie-in to tell whether or not there's even a decent enough sized audience there. Now, I'm not a fan of huge audiences. I actually think we get more conversion and traction from the nano micro influencer level, which is usually less than 100,000 plays per month. And usually even better if we do 10,000 or less per month. We'll still usually get a very, very good conversion rate, and you'll sell more on those shows get more subscribers if that's what you're looking for. But at the end of the day, that's what I look for. That's what I would want more myself. And if you're service provider, if your publicist, if the company, the guest booking agent isn't going to do that for you, they're instead going to program through their list and go, who do we know who we've called before, who we've gotten 10 other authors on the show before, or 10 other guests onto their show before. So they're really willing to take guests. Then they're actually not putting in the amount of work necessary for it to be worth spending that kind of money.
That is such a good point. So I want to go back to something you just said, because we're talking about a done for you model where, I go to Tracy and I say, hey, find this. One of the biggest marketing fails I see out there with people is they say, oh, Tracy, it's done for you. Now go do it. But they don't do their part. So what is the expectation? If I hired you today for a done for you, what would you need me to do?
So first off, I want you to give me at least 30 days up front. Because if you don't give me 30 days, I can't do the things I need to fix your one sheet, your website, get you ready to be pitched at the same time that I'm finding you the exact right fit partner. So I need to learn about you and get all those details. And now I'm going to pull it out of you, because I know my clients don't want to do the work, right? That's why they hire me. But we have to do some of our homework up front, and we have to get the things like, this is what I get all the time. I get one sheets that have like, I can talk about SEO. Okay, great.
That's it.
That's it. What about SEO? Everybody and their brother talks about search engine optimization. What's special about you? What do you bring that's special, that's different? And so we have to force that down into, I just want to talk about this topic, into, no, I'm really an expert in these areas of this topic. And so we have to get where that specialness lies. Then it makes it easier for us to pitch our clients to the podcast host, but it also makes it easier for the podcast host to go, yeah, I never talked about that on my show before. I totally want to talk about that. So you're giving them great topic ideas at the same moment that makes you really attractive. And then it also makes it easier to see if I'm, looking through you and I'm understanding you better. It makes me understand what shows are going to be a better fit for you. So one of the practices we do is we look at you and say, who do you want to be in your marketplace? Who's about a year ahead of you? Who's just one step ahead with getting more publicity than you? We want to know who they are. And we're going to follow them around the podcasting sphere. And we're going to look and see where they guested before. And we're going to see if those are right fit for you or not. Sometimes they will be, sometimes they won't be, because sometimes that person didn't have a very good podcast booking agent. But we can check that. And if we see that, then we can always say, hey, podcast host, you had so-and-so on the show before. I talk about it from a female perspective, and wouldn't you like to hear about that? And 9 times out of 10, that works really easily that way. And it gets you right up there side by side with that competitor you've been trolling.
That is so cool. So just to be clear, though, a done for you doesn't mean that I just show up, pay you, and go away and you work your magic. I have to have some input into it.
Yeah, it's input at the very beginning.
Okay.
And that's the important part. Yeah. Research input at the very beginning. Let us get to know you. Give us the details about what your goals are, things like that. And this is the thing. We really look for what I call active clients, right? We look for clients who are going to participate in the process. When they sub it out, when they say, oh, my assistant will deal with all that, it will turn out badly for you. Mm-hmm. You will get bad results. And so we actually try to force that out in our sales model so that it won't happen. So if you don't take the sales calls, if you don't participate in the onboarding, you're just not going to be a good client.
I agree. I see that all over marketing where, you fill out the intake and then your assistant handles the rest and it doesn't hit the mark, because to get the essence of you into all of your marketing and the podcast and everywhere, you have to show up. It's not, and I know so many people just don't want to deal or learn about the marketing aspect of what they're doing. But
I don't want people to think like, so many times we buy what some people call a done for you program. And essentially you're filling out all the information yourself. And that's not what we do here. Our job is to pull it out of you, but then write it for you, pull it out of you, and then build you the best list possible. And then have a conversation about that, because maybe it's not a right fit. So we have touch points along the way before we've done the work all the way through. So when we pull a list of 25 podcast shows that we think you should be on, after the first 5 to 10, we send you the list and have you give us feedback. And that way you don't maybe have to vet the entire 25 lists yourself, because I don't want you to do that much work, but you can spot check out through 10 of them and say, yeah, that sounds like the right show. I like that host. This sounds like the right audience for me. You understand me. You've got this right, before we fulfill all our deliverables. And that's sometimes what happens is that when you work with lots of publicists and lots of booking agents, they drip it out to you one by one. And so it doesn't feel like you're on the path. It's just, they're sort of like pivoting. Every time they change their mind about what you say, I didn't like that one, then they change it to somewhere else. And you might miss a whole group of really exciting podcasts that you could have been on because you made one comment that you didn't like this one particular show they put forward to you because they dripped it out.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that for a minute. Publicist versus working with you guys. Publicists do a traditional media pitch, and they often work with the people that they know over and over and over versus finding that real niche for you. Would that be accurate?
Yeah. So look, many of you are going to need a media publicist, a media level publicist. You need to be featured on the news, local news, in newspapers. You need to be featured in magazines and publications. Like the publicists are great at that because their relationships help get you in the door of places that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise. That's why they're gold. You want to mine those relationships. But with podcasting, the relationships really aren't there. If you have a relationship with a good media agent, it's rare. I've done this for a very long time, and I have 100 media people who send me guests, and I probably pick about 6 or 7 of them every year. Like it's small in the scope of things. So there's not an opportunity to build up I'm going to call it a rapport. Right. We just don't have that with the media agents that are out there, with the publicists that are out there, because what we're looking for is so specific sometimes that it doesn't fit them day in and day out. Now, luckily, we're great. If we're great at our specificity about who we're looking for, then they will get back to us occasionally with a really good fit. And so that's kind of what I train the publicists who contact me is like, don't contact me unless it meets this criteria. When it meets that criteria, they send them to me and they're great. But you have to train them to do that. And so that's really hard when there are also podcasters going in and out. Hosts disappearing, right? They pod fade all the time. Mm-hmm. It's a lot of time investment on the publicist side that they don't want to do for someone who's not going to stick around.
Yeah. So another program I see out there a lot is I'll give you a list and you reach out to these people and pitch yourself. A lot of work, huh?
It is a lot of work, but I have to say that it actually is more effective. So if you're willing to do that, it can be more effective. So if I reach out on your behalf, I'm going to get about a third of them. It's just going to happen. It's going to be about a third are going to convert. But if I gave you that list back and said, okay, now for the 2/3 that didn't convert, are you willing to send this message, which I give you ahead of time, this exact message, direct message in LinkedIn to this person? You'll easily convert another half of that group.
Wow. Why is that?
It's because podcasters prefer to not go through someone else. They don't want to go through an assistant. What happens is a lot of times when I allow a publicist in or I allow an assistant in through the process, I get a whole load of messages I don't need as a podcast host. Like beyond scheduling, it's like so-and-so is concerned about their equipment, and the podcast guest you have scheduled for next week wants to know when it's going to air. And they ask me a whole bunch of newbie questions that just drive me crazy. And it's not worth it to me. I'd rather get somebody who's like, oh, so glad and eager to be on my show that they're willing to send me a direct message. We find our match because the message is crafted properly. And I go, great, now you're going to be on my show. Now we have this direct, simple chat conduit. I know you're not going to be a difficult guest. And I know this is going to be easy to book, and I'm going to get you on my show. It's going to be straightforward through it. It's going to be a nice fit for both of us. And we're all going to walk away with that with a win-win. We want that. So I want it to be, most podcasters are doing everything themselves. The last thing they need is 10 emails to book a guest, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I'm one of those. I book everything. I have an intake sheet and a calendar link, and I've automated as much as I can. So once you've been a guest, what is your responsibility? It's not just ego driven, like, oh, I've been on this show and I'm going to post it once. But on the other side of it, book people tend to be buy my book, obnoxiously. So how do you temper the two and promote just the right amount?
Okay. So first things first, for you others out there, what I do want to say is my number one thing is when you go on the show, share generously.
Yes.
Stop saying it's in my book, buy it and read it. Nobody wants to hear that on a podcast. That will be a guarantee that those listeners won't buy your book, and the host won't do a great job of sharing you. They just won't care at that point. But if you share generously on that show, stories maybe that aren't in your book, there are ways to do that. You're going to get more out of the whole experience, and you're going to give the podcast host something to share. So there's something that they're going to be able to promote out in social media, a tidbit you didn't say in your book, or something that extra. These bonus materials are really valuable. And so those kinds of things are going to make it easier for them to promote your show and sell some of your books, right? So we want, it's a win-win then. We want them invested in that process for us. So that's the first part of it. It's like, if you do that well, then the whole post side of it is easy. But the number one easiest way to get a podcast host to accept you as a guest is to tell them what you're going to do for them. And so when I will prepare out a video teaser. I will put out 4 or 5 social posts. Once the episode airs, of course. I mean, you can't always do that ahead of time. I'll share a quote from the show. I'll share something about the host. I might share the episode itself in a blog. I might share the video from it, but I'll share it in multiple ways so that they get about a week's worth of promotion over the course of a month, because I try to drip it out, because that's a better pace for people to actually notice it. And I do that across all my social media, so I have a large reach. So, and then to flip that, I can also invite them to be a guest on my show, which is really helpful for me. So when we do a podcast swap, they get publicity in exchange. And for me, I can also always write an article about them. So even if I can't do a podcast hosting swap because my show is not a fit for them, I can also write an article. And then that helps get them. So I'm giving them a lot in exchange. It's easier to book me then. They get more out of booking me than they do just some random person who sent them saying, I want to sell a book on your show.
Exactly. That's amazing.
So if we're good at the promotion on the back end, then, and it doesn't really matter how big our audience is, because if we know my audience and your audience are a nice match together, and I'm going to do a really good job of promotion, you're a lot higher likelihood a candidate for my show. It's just going to make it easier.
Do you know, that's so amazing. I got an invite to be on somebody's show last week, and that is what he told me up front is I saw you shared it everywhere. The problem is the topic. He didn't bother to dive into the topic. I wasn't appropriate for his show. So,
oh, no.
And I said, I know absolutely nothing about commercial real estate. I'm honored that you asked, but I don't know if you can tell me why I'm a good fit on a commercial real estate show.
So this happened to me. I was invited on Jay Massey's Cash Flow Diary, which is a great show in the passive real estate investing area, things like that. And I thought he's great. It's a really great show. It's always been top ranked. And I was like, I don't know that I can talk about that kind of investing. I'm not that kind of investor. I don't know anything about it. And he said, no, I'm inviting you on my show because you can share it everywhere, but I want you to talk specifically about, and he wanted me to talk about Amazon selling as a passive investment strategy. So I went on to tell everybody, it's not a passive investment strategy. It's a heck of a lot of work. And so, we had a lot of fun doing that, and it was okay because people were thinking that in their head, and I debunked it for them. So you never know why someone invites you on the show, but push back and ask, because if it's not a right fit, you're wasting your time and theirs, and that's not a great idea. So good thing you said, I'm not sure about this. Tell me why I should.
I did. I actually said, go back and listen to Whitney's episode and tell me what you thought I could be of service for of your audience. And he did come back and he's like, yeah, I don't know. So I turned it down, but I was honored. I was honored that he asked.
There you go. Right. And see, that's because he's looking for someone who can share really well. That's his goal, right? He didn't, and he probably had someone pulling a list together of people who share really well without looking deeper into the criteria. That's why this list building side of it, to me, is the most critical part. If you get that right, and you do a good job of vetting. So I just had Mark Hirschberg on my show, and he's an author. He wrote a book on careers and sort of planning out your career. And so it's really as like starting out in all of those. He could talk on any show basically, because you're either advancing your career or you're starting out in the world in your career. Like, he had so many different topics he could dive it into. He's a professor at MIT. Like, it was just easy stuff. He could be on anybody's show, but he built the list himself. And I was his 99th interview. He has done now over 100 guest interview spots, but he felt that over the time he got honed in and found the right niche every single time. And he could see the exact boost to his book sales every time a podcast came out. So he would see, he could see his rankings move up and his sales move up. So they were clicking it and his sales would happen. He could see it sometimes, but, before he received the email from the host saying, your episode aired. Because when an episode airs in a podcast, sometimes it happens overnight. So it might happen at like 2 a.m. Pacific time or something. And so by his time, 6 a.m., and he's looking at his stats or whatever, he's already had some international traffic who downloaded it earlier. And so that's where he would be like, oh, I'm already seeing people. A podcast must have aired. Let's see whose it is. And then an email would follow up sometime during that day. And you'd realize, yep, it was this one that aired. And I'm getting a boost from it. So he was seeing the direct response happening from him being on the show, but he's super crafted at what he does. And he's easy. He shares everything. He's very generous about what it is. And he knew every time he went on it that it was going to be a right fit for both of them. He took a few risks too, tested a few shows, didn't know if they were going to work. One of my best, I'm going to say tips to people is don't discount a brand new show. A publicist will say the show doesn't have a track record. They haven't launched yet. They are not aired yet. So if they're not associated with a celebrity, then they won't put you on a brand new show. But that's a mistake, because when a show is brand new, it might not make it. That's absolutely true. It might not make it past 25 episodes. It might not even make it past 10. But the reality is if they're doing their show, the most promotion they'll do for that show is in the first 8 weeks. And if your episode is in those first groupings of shows, those first 10 shows, you're going to get the most traffic. Then what happens is as the show grows over time, if they are successful, the first episodes are always some of the most listened to episodes of all time. So people will go check out the first few episodes, check it out around there, and then, join and subscribe to and listen to the most recent ones. So with the early ones, capture their eye first. So
true.
Hidden secret.
And what you just mentioned there is a great strategy why you want to continue to be on podcast is if you're not on page 1 on Amazon, chances are people are not going to find you. That's what we do with the quiz when speakers are out speaking, which they're not doing right now. But that thank you page is where they click and you get a conglomerate of sales from that pushes you up in the ranking and keeps you on page 1. And literally, if you're on page 2 or 3, chances are nobody will ever find your book if they don't have your name and the name of the book and search it. It's just not going to happen. So, but if they put in a topic, they're going to go there and find it because you're on that first page.
Well, and that's was Mark Hirschberg's point. He's like, I'm doing 100 shows. I didn't do 100 in 100 days. I did 100 shows over a course of a year because I wanted my book, The Career Toolkit, to continually sell. Right. He just wanted to have that sustainable sales model because over time, that's likely then to get picked up in a publication. That's likely to get him the higher media over time.
Exactly. Well, Tracy, this has been fabulous. I think people learned a lot today about, why you should do these podcast tours. Where can people find you? And you have a program right now as well. Do you have a page you can send them to find out more about that?
Sure, absolutely. You can go to podetize.com and there's a guest services section in there, but I suggest you just book an inquiry. That's the fastest way. Go book an inquiry with my team. And, sometimes you get Tom. He's been on your show before. A lot of times you get Tom who just happens to be available for the call. But, that's the best way because it's not a right fit for everyone. So we want to make sure that it's going to really be right for you, right for your book, right for what you want to accomplish. And if we can right fit match those goals with what's going on in the podcast ecosystem today, then we can make it win-win for all.
Fantastic. Could you spell Podetize, please?
Absolutely. It's Podetize. So it's like podcast and monetization smushed together, Podetize.
I never knew that's what you were going for there. That's interesting. I've worked with you guys forever.
There you go. I guess it was the first time I said it to someone recently too, and they said the same thing. And I was like, really? It's not that obvious? This is where your brand isn't always as obvious to other people as it is to you.
That's so true. We had a discussion earlier about, people think a brand is, and actually it's the perception. It's not what Tracy. It's
not what you say.
Yep. Brand. It's what I think of Tracy's brand. So I just learned something new there. You've been incredibly successful, even if people don't know what it means.
That's right. It rolls off the tongue either way. So it sounds like a good thing.
Well, thank you so much for being on today.
Anytime. And, authors out there thinking about the profit model. That's why I love what Juliet's title here, thinking about that profit model. We always have to think about that, no matter whether we're doing our promotion or we're doing our writing. We're always thinking about that profit piece because it's important.
It's very important. Thank you.